Hey guys, my name's Sam and welcome to Prep Medic. This week's video, we have Teimojin here from Survival Doctors, and we are going through the best survival items to carry on a day hike and overnight. So for those of you that don't know, Teimojin is a physician who went through a fellowship in wilderness medicine. He is also a finalist on Alone and a very competent bushcrafter. So he is quite qualified to go through these packs and kind of talk us through some of the best survival items to carry in your packs, both for a day hike if you're just going out for fun on the trails and want to be prepared for the potential of being stranded for a prolonged period of time or injured, and then what you should be carrying in more of an overnight kit where you have a bigger load, you can carry a little bit more supplies with you. So with all of that being said, why don't we go through what you're carrying?
Awesome. So I like to categorize things to really, in your mind, prioritize what you need to carry. And if you do need to improvise, improvising whatever you need in those categories. So number one, things that can kill you super fast are medical things. Bleeding control is super important because if you're wielding an axe or going at high velocities, that can kill you really fast. So I have a tourniquet over here. I also have a pressure dressing as well, and I took out the outer layer package so it's easier to get to.
Absolutely.
And lighter weight too. I have some cravats materials to make a splint, and also, if need be, use it for fire material as well, because you can soak this in Vaseline. And for wound care, what I really like is just a regular 50 to 60 ml syringe, and this actually is part of my water filtration system. Okay. So it's a twofold. You can do some pressure washes with this, but also if you have a water filter like a Sawyer and it gets stuck from gunky stuff, you can do some backflow pressure with this and it just fits right in. So really like that for wound care. And in addition to wound care, I also have Vaseline, which is dual purpose. So after a pressure wash, you're taking out a lot of that organic debris, a lot of the bacteria. The chances of infection is diminished unless you're in a swamp or you're kind of hand deep in poop, right? So once all that bacteria is gone, you just want to make sure that wound is covered. So what I use for that is a little bit of Vaseline so it doesn't stick, a little bit of a sterile dressing or even some cotton. And if you really want to go sterile, you can boil it, dry it, and then put it on your wound with a little bit of Vaseline. And my preference for bandages, I don't bring any Band-Aids with me because they typically last a few hours, if at that, if you're super active. Hardly ever lasts a day. So I use this athletic tape, and the reason why I like this athletic tape is I have a history of a severe ankle sprain, so I tape my ankles as well. And if you want to see that video, we have a video of that too. So I use this for bandages, I use this for my ankle, and Vaseline, both for fire and both for wound care. Besides that, I got some trauma shears to help make easy work if I'm using that to either expose myself or a patient. I have a splint. Now this one's a little bit of a smaller one. I would recommend maybe a 36-inch one, because then you can do longer bones and you can cut it into whatever length you'd like as well.
And these things are super light. These SAM splints weigh absolutely nothing, and you can fit them like between folds of fabric. They're not taking up any space either.
Like even if you're doing like a hyperlight or ultralight pack, it goes right into the insert of like your water pouch basically. I actually reach for this quite often as a sit pad or something to waft a fire. And there's just so many uses for this type of splint. And again, if you don't want to go the route of an emergency tarp, you can bring a first aid emergency blanket. That will work, but as soon as you're going through the bush, it just takes one puncture and that thing just splits wide open. So I have that, and then I just have some elastic bandage. So this can help me if I'm trying to splint something and need more material. And also if I want to make an improvised pressure dressing, I can use this and put some kind of firm object on top of that and then add that pressure with this elastic bandage on top of that little knob. So that's what I carry for my first aid. It's very basic, making sure that your emergency stuff is handled and making sure the nuisances are also handled as well. The only thing that's kind of a first aid supply that that I keep outside my first aid kit because I reach for it so often is hydration salts. Now, dehydration and muscle cramping is going to be one of the most common things that you'll have on a hike. And this allows your blood and the water that you do drink to stay inside your blood vessels instead of either go out in your pee or sweat out. So this is super important. And I also have electrolytes in just simple packages like this. Like ramen has a lot of sodium in it, and if you look at packagings that also has different electrolytes like potassium, magnesium, that will be even better for your rehydration. So at altitude, it is incredibly hard, especially above that 10,000 feet, to process food properly. You'll already feel nauseated, you'll already have a headache, and if you go for something greasy and fatty, number one, it takes a lot of energy, and number two, it might make you puke. So having things that are based in electrolyte rehydration, simple starches and sugars are super helpful specific to this altitude. Next is exposures and dehydration. So I always like to bring things for the weather. So whether you're in a cold environment or a wet environment, that might mean you bring a rain jacket or a puffy jacket or something like that. When I'm doing like a day hike, even though I know the area and I know I'm probably not staying overnight, I do like bringing a tarp. So a tarp, and specifically a Malar tarp, a space blanket tarp, allows me to shelter myself from the rain, makes an amazing sit pad because it's almost like a seat warmer when you sit on it because you can have that 90% of your heat radiating back to you. And in addition to that, if you ever stumble upon someone who has hypothermia, you can treat that. You can help mitigate that severe transition to severe hypothermia. So combination of right clothes for the situation, something to give yourself cover and shelter. And one thing that I always bring with me is a canteen. So a metal canteen is my preference for most situations because you can purify your water. And in addition to that, as you're purifying it with some boiling, you can also warm this up and put it inside your pack. So let's say you're stranded, you got lost. If you have the right tools, I also include a fire set in my kit. You can make a fire, warm this up, and keep it close to your body. And as long as you have that, the likelihood of you going into severe hypothermia is just diminished significantly. Now these titanium canteens are super light. So if you think about your 1 liter Nalgene bottles, the plastic ones, right, this is lighter than that. Okay. So to have that effect where it's metal, you can boil things in it, you can use it to reheat, because Nalgene bottles are notorious to explode under higher temperatures. And it also comes into this little thing over here, so you can make yourself teas, and you can also cook stuff in it as well. So I like that. And then the last thing that I would say is super important is a combination. So it's either you have something to make fires or materials or a knowledge to make fires. Right. So if you're amazing at friction fires and bow drills and hand drills, great. I am not a master of that yet. So I bring multiple different ignition sources, which doesn't have to be a huge deal. It can be as little as a small little torch or a lighter. I do like ferrocenium. It is a high temperature sparker, so a lot of people have seen that before. The combination of ferrocenium and a high temperature burning tinder is super important as well. So the combination of magnesium and ferrocenium is pretty much a fail-safe. If you can't light a fire with that, it's really hard not to light a fire with that. So those are the combos that I have. And in my first aid kit, so I'm gonna kind of go between first aid kits and fire because there are a few things that I use for both. In my first aid kit, I have duct tape and I also have Vaseline. Those are the two things that I use both for fire and both for first aid. Like you'll notice if you're working in the bush, you get like little cuts and scrapes like this, your hands are a little dry, you might have some chapped lips. And even for chronic wound care, not everything needs antibiotics. If you do a good job at keeping the wound cleaned and covered and washing as much debris and bacteria out as possible, then all you need is a little bit of a bandage and then some Vaseline to make sure it doesn't stick and you're ripping out scabs. Vaseline is also petroleum based, so super flammable, and whatever lint that you may have in your socks or materials that you can spare or trashed bandages, mix that with the Vaseline and there goes your first kind of candle to light some of these small little twigs, and that kind of guarantees that you have that fire. So fire is important, and another thing that you can do that's really useful is a cutting implement. That might be a pocket knife. Some people like their fixed blades. If it's a day hike for me personally, I don't necessarily always bring a fixed blade because a lot of people use it to process wood. But in environments like this, there are twigs that are kind of the diameter of lead pencils. So with that dry tinder, you don't necessarily need to split wood with that fixed blade. And even still, if you know how to use a sharp edge and make a wedge out of whatever block of wood, you can use that to split things as well. One thing that I do like for, let's say if I'm going out more than a day or if I'm doing an overnighter, is I bring a saw, a tiny small saw, maybe a 9-inch. The brand that I prefer is Silky and Agawa Canyon. Both of them produce really nice sharp saws and reliable saws. Silky is a Japanese made one and it just rips like crazy. I've had mine for over 10 years and it's still taking down trees. So just to review, you got your first aid kit, you got your water and cover shelter, and you also have in that shelter you have your like clothes and that type of stuff, and then your fire implements as well. One thing that I do want to touch upon are things that just make your life easier.
Right.
If you want to add more purification, so this is like for maybe if you were thinking of doing just like an overnighter somewhere, having multiple ways to light a fire, but also multiple ways to purify your water is super important. This is a Sawyer filter, super lightweight, and this has an adaptable thread to any water bottle. So you can literally go into a corner store, gas station, pick up like a 2-liter bottle to go on a hike with you in addition to your other one and have a nice 3 liters with you. And whatever water you find, you can just plug this in and purify it. Now, when we're thinking about the most common causes or common reasons people get lost or rescued is because they get lost and they don't have preparations. So I encourage everyone that goes on hikes to have some way to orient themselves. So if you know how to use a map and compass, awesome, great. So in this area we got, So in this area, I already marked out where we are exactly, some of the features, rivers, junctions, and so forth. So just making sure that you know where you're going and you know what are your borders so that if you do get lost, you can go to a main road or you can signal for help. So these are things that I personally carry in addition to those 5 critical things, because this kind of ensures you don't get lost.
Right.
And if you want to take it a step above and you're going out in the big backcountry, having some way to call for help is super important too. So having a sat phone or some way to call for an SOS is super important.
And for those people that might not want to go with a full like satellite phone, you know, those can be kind of expensive. You can get like the Garmin InReach, which I'm personally a firm believer in. You know, they're so small, relatively cheap. Like obviously there's a cost, but you know, they're not costing you thousands of dollars, and you know, you can get text rescuers or even just, you know, text your wife, tell her you're okay in the middle of nowhere. I've had really good luck with patients calling for help in the backcountry with those.
For sure. So those are the 5 basic items. These are some additional items that I do carry that makes my life more safe and comfortable. And besides that, I think that's pretty much it.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions for Teimojin, leave them in the comments down below. Obviously, there are a ton of different variations of this equipment. Everybody's going to have a different opinion on what you should be carrying in these packs. You know, I'm sure people disagree, agree, whatever. Leave them down there, and I will see you next week.